you don't.
And he's definitely the guy to talk to about growing up with space.
It's old Chesky, but don't worry about it. You just call me Wes. Everybody else does. Are you filming? Okay. With the NSA? No. No? You should be. Okay. Anybody tell me the time again? That went right into the show.
It's 11 o'clock.
It's 11 o'clock? We're starting. Okay. Let's wait for the next one to get here. Okay, welcome, everybody. Yes, I'm Wes Olszewski. This cover that you see is going to be the standard cover for a 6-book series that I'm writing for Kindle and for print that's called Growing Up with Spaceflight. And it was going to start out as a 4-book series, and then it got really long. And so now it's a 6-book series. And it's basically my story, and the premise is this, okay? Some people grew up close to the space program, and some people worked close to the space program with their hands on, making history. The rest of us had to watch it on TV. That would be us, right? Well, some of you are not in that boat right now. Anyhow, are we talking in the back?
Absolutely.
There's no gum chewing going on.
Do we swill water?
You swill water? Yes, as long as you don't gurgle it. My earliest memory growing up with spaceflight was flight of Alan Shepard on Freedom 7. I was sitting in front of my grandmother's TV. My parents had left me there and gone somewhere else, and they often did that. But anyway, I remember that, but mine looked more like this.
Yeah, that's what I want.
Yeah, we remember when it looked like that. And of course they had these great graphics, okay, just high-tech graphics. This one, you know what they did? If you really watch it, they have a piece of paper that was in front of the graphic, and as time would go by, they'd pull the paper back, somebody would station pull the paper back, and it looked like the rocket. They were really tracking it, so cheapo graphics. Another thing is that for Liberty Bell 7, which is, you can actually find this video on YouTube if you look for it. These are kind of screen captures from there, and it's a kinescope process that they used years ago to actually record this. Liberty Bell 7 was the next flight, and what NBC did, or NBC did, was they went in during a practice launch, and they filmed the ground crews doing the practice launch, and that way they could intermix that with the regular TV coverage, because there wasn't a lot with the Redstone. I mean, you shoot it, it's gone. So they had these guys working the consoles. It's 1961, so of course you had to have a whole lot of Alan Shepard, all right, because the Earth could not turn in those days without Alan Shepard. Aboard the carrier, they had a remote man, and his name was Charles Batchelder. And he was basically just talking into a microphone like a radio announcer, because those were the days when radio was still hot. Most of the spaceflight coverage that people got came off their car radio or off their home radio. And while Gus Grissom was in the water struggling, Batchelder was going, and everything's looking great, folks. You know, America's latest hero and astronaut. A lot has been made in the Hollywood media that we all know is bunk about what went on with Grissom's spacecraft and his landing. I want you to take a look at this picture. What's missing from that picture? Take a real good look, okay? Gus is in there somewhere. His spacecraft is in there somewhere. There's 2 helicopters and a carrier. What's missing? Do you see one single rescue swimmer anywhere?
No.
No. The swimmers are over here on the carrier. They have to swim real hard to get over to where Gus is. He's, I think in this picture, I enlarged it, I think he's right there. But NASA didn't plan for that, okay? Their procedure for getting out of a Mercury capsule, well, I'll go to that next. Here's the problems with this. Number 1, the explosive hatch was never tested with an astronaut inside conducting procedures. Okay, the procedure to remove the hatch, to blow the hatch, was you pulled a pin to unsafe the hatch, and that took the difference down from 14 pounds per square inch pressure on that to make it go to 4 pounds. Okay, 4 pounds of pressure. You can put your hand on an egg on a scale, and you can push down with 4 pounds of pressure and not break the egg. Okay, that's number 1. Number 2, no rescue swimmers in the water. Number 3, no flotation power on the spacecraft. And number 4, the explosive hatch had never been tested at sea in sea conditions like the ones that he would have landed in. And No supplemental flotation equipment for the astronaut whatsoever. The procedures, whoops, I think I took the procedures slide out. I guess I did. The procedures for getting out of this spacecraft were, you open the hatch with the kaboom and make it blow. Then you take off your helmet, you spin around, you sit your butt on the hatch sill and wait for the horse collar to be lowered, put it over your shoulders, and up you go to be a hero. That was the procedure. That's what Alan Shepard followed. Yes?
Oh, okay, that
Yeah.
just answered the question.
Alan Shepard did exactly that. The only difference was he didn't have the explosive hatch. He had a metal latch over his shoulder that he could crank and the hatch would come open. So that was the difference right there. All right, next, John Glenn flew on, what was the name of that flight? Oh, anyway. And after he got done, he didn't have to worry about flotation equipment. He could walk on the water. Now, you've heard a lot about everybody praying across the country because John Glenn's heat shield may be loose, right? Bull. Nobody outside of Mission Control knew that that warning had come up. As a matter of fact, a lot of people inside Mission Control didn't know that warning had come up. Everything that the public got, including the media, on these Mercury flights came through this filter right here. Shorty Powers. Colonel Shorty Powers. He was the guy that announced the flights for NASA. He was the filter. He never said a word about it. It wasn't until well after Glenn was back on terra firma that the word suddenly got out that, oh, by the way, we had this little glitch. But if you watch modern documentaries, you would think that the whole nation was on the edge of their seats praying for John Glenn because he may burn up. No. Space toys. We grew up with those. This one, I found this one on eBay. $1,500. No, I did not buy it. But if you look really closely, what's the problem that you might see with this as far as accuracy? The meatball is backwards. It was made in Japan, so you know, they read differently than we do, I guess. I can say that my wife is Japanese. This one is what everybody likes, right? Yeah. But if you look at this closely, there's one thing you notice. All the figures, well actually most of the figures are pad rats. There's one astronaut in it. The rest are just pad rats.
Can we go to the screen back? You've got difficulty with the
Are you having difficulty with it?
Yeah, I can kind of see it.
You can kind of see it? Oh, wait, wait a minute.
I know you can fix it.
What's yours? Can you do that?
You can drop, we can move this a little bit. It's coming over the edge, we kind of sized it as good as we could. Oh, there's a drop on the front of it. You push the button down and it'll drop down a little bit. Push the button down. Yeah.
Oh, no!
Who said that?
I'll take off my glasses.
Yeah, you can put it on the
Yes,
whiteboard.
button again.
What's that?
Put it on the whiteboard.
Okay, hold on. You got auto adjust. Oh, that did really good.
Yeah.
You also got
Do
to
the front of the
focus.
lens.
Let the
Focus right in front of the lens.
Try the focus on the lens.
First,
so you
bring
can
in
get
the front of the lens.
But I have to move it.
Technology.
We're great. Now we're moving
You
the
could just
screen.
put it on the whiteboard.
2 hours later.
Yeah.
Why did you think of that?
Where's the sound? I have the sound.
If you put it on the whiteboard, more of
Are you
us
Polish?
could see in between heads.
No, then you don't know what dupa means.
I grew up in a Polish neighborhood.
You recognize that right off. One of my little girls called her teacher a dupa. So it's just a cutie name we use at home. All right, we're going to be a little crooked there, but I am too. So anyway. All right, next, and the last one was Gordon Cooper's flight. He made 34 orbits, or 34 hours and 19 minutes, and 34 orbits and 19 hours. Whatever, 22 hours and 34. Whatever. I'm going faster. This spacecraft is really cool. Okay, this one is in the Uvar-Hazy Museum. I can't ever pronounce that correctly. You can choke trying to pronounce that. My buddy Brian that works there, he can pronounce it. This is Alan Shepard's craft that he was going to call Freedom 7-2. And he wanted to go up on an atlas and orbit until they, quote, just ran out of about everything. And after Cooper's flight, NASA said, now we're going to move on to the next phase. And Shepard was not happy. He wanted to go into orbit. He didn't want to be a suborbital dude. Everybody at NASA said, no, that's it. James Webb said, no, we're moving on to Gemini. That's it. When they went to the White House to celebrate Gordon Cooper's return, Alan Shepard pulled JFK aside and took him by the ear and said, I'd like to do this. And JFK said, no, we're going to stick with what Administrator Webb says. So Shepard down the drain on that one. And now his spacecraft is in the museum. Basically, Cooper had done that. He had gone up with the Mercury spacecraft and ran out of just about everything, okay? What are you going to do? Do it again? For another day? Big deal. So anyway, this is the pad from which all those atlases launched. That's how it looks today. You're on the bus tour with us on Sunday, and you go out there. If you actually climb up on the blockhouse, you'll see this site. They let you climb up on the blockhouse. And I went with Jim Banke. He and I together had the run of this place for a day. I was like a 15-year-old kid again. It was great. So I have a side story about that. Maybe I'll tell you if I've got time. But anyway, as space buffs, if you really look at it and use your imagination from the 60s, you might just see the spirit of Mercury still there. The next project was Mercury Mark II, or Gemini. Actually, Mercury Mark II started even before Freedom 7 flew, which is really kind of neato-spedito when you think about it. They went to McDonald and they said, we want a Mercury spacecraft that will last longer, that will fly longer, and that astronauts can actually get out of and control. And they came up with this. This picture is really cool because if you notice, they still have the Mercury side ports that were on Freedom 7 that never flew again. And then they have these giant windows. Those just really cracked me up for the two astronauts. There's also a picture of a Mercury Mark II spacecraft with the Mercury-style escape tower on it. There's a drawing of that I recently saw and copied, but I couldn't put it here. This was an early adventure in Mercury. What they were going to do is try to make a space station. This is another one that came out real early. All right, Gemini 3 was the very first flight. This is an early picture of it. They're doing a launch test. Looked more like that to us. And we had channel 12 in my house, and that was Jules Bergman. We had channel 5, and that was John Chancellor. And we had channel 25, and that was Walter Cronkite. I kept it on 25. Gemini 3 went for 3 orbits. It was 4 hours, 52 minutes. And if you get a chance to look at the onboard transcripts, you'll find out that the 2 astronauts on board, Gus Grissom and John Young, did almost nothing but swear the entire flight. That's why you really don't see that published a lot from NASA. And Tom Stafford said the same thing. He says, we were listening to the tapes, it's like, they're doing nothing but swearing. It was very successful. But even under the Iron Curtain or behind the Iron Curtain, they were watching Gemini. This is really a cool little, it's a little card that they made in Czechoslovakia. Over here we had cool buttons. They don't have those anymore. How would you do that for the space station? It might actually keep track of who's on what adventure, It took me 3 years before I figured out what mission overlapped with the next. And,
They have movie posters now.
Movie posters.
Oh
yeah.
Each mission they'll put on sunglasses.
Yeah, I got walls for that. Gemini 4 was the next flight where we did, where Ed White did the famous spacewalk. Try and find a non-iconic photograph of that spacewalk. So I really tried for non-iconic photographs for this presentation. That's the best one I could find. He's upside down, kind of looking in there, but it's real cool. You can see McDivitt right in here taking the photograph. The next one was Gemini 5 with Cooper and Conrad and the famous 8 days or bust. And if you look at this patch very closely, you can see where they've sewn fabric over it to cover up the 8 days or bust. When they first came up with this concept to actually have a mission patch, James Webb was totally against it. And Conrad and Cooper were at his house for a dinner. And actually, Conrad and him almost came to blows over this. And they got their patch, and when it said 8 days or bust, then they had another fight. And it ended up, they said, okay, listen, if you cover up the 8 days or bust, because they were afraid that the Gemini wouldn't last 8 days. And if it didn't, what would the media say? You busted. The flight's a bust. So, appropriately, and then they were supposed to tear that off after the mission, and they never did. They were just relieved to be home. About that time, we got these guys. Who in here did not have these guys?
Oh, yeah.
Guys or girls, okay, men or women, who here did not have these guys? We all had these guys. Notice that they got this like AR-15 here. And they've got Geiger counters. Okay. And there was a guy that had a camera, you know.
Didn't Lenco buy the molds of those or something?
I think they did, but I really haven't researched it that closely. We all had those, okay? You get a bag of them, I think, for 29 cents. Unless you wanted the 100 bag, then it was 49 cents. Next was Project Gemini, the 2 weeks in space, Gemini 6 and 7. Everybody knows that Gemini 6, their Agena blew up just below orbit. As soon as the engine started in the Agena to boost it into its orbit, it exploded, or at least they think it did. It was really funny during the broadcast. They were saying, we're still getting some telemetry from one of the beacons. Yeah, because the beacon's all by itself up there doing this. I can't understand. It must be all in one beacon. Walter Cronkite started that broadcast by saying, this will be the broadcast of the launch of Gemini 6 to go out and meet Gemini 7, by saying, this will be our most exciting day in spaceflight. Boy, was he right, okay? Because this was the attempt at launch where the engine started up and the aerojet shut right back down again. And Wally Schirra actually got a cockpit indication that he had lifted off. His clock started. And that clock is only supposed to start if one particular plug underneath the booster comes out as it lifts off. That plug fell out. So his clock started, but he had no feeling in his butt that he had moved. And since he'd flown before, he knew I hadn't left the pad. So he just did nothing. Just sat there, like you said, and breathed.
The procedures.
The escape systems were ejection seats.
Yeah, and that's another thing. Escape systems were ejection seats, and these guys have always said it was commit suicide in order to avoid being killed, because they were in there with suits made of nylon, purged with oxygen, and these rockets would eject you out, and you were supposedly coming out like a human candle. They tested those suits, but every time they did, they purged the compartment with nitrogen. So nobody really knew if this would work. I'd love to see somebody on TV, like one of those Mythbusters, try that. See if that was really true, you know? See if it would come out like a Roman candle. So anyway, in addition to that, as they went through the inspection of the booster, they found that there was a little dust plug, tiny little dust plug that you put into lines in aviation, that was still in one of the lines down here in the booster. And it was so far back into the plumbing that you really couldn't see that it was still there. And they looked at the telemetry and they said, yeah, the plug fell out, but look here, we were degrading before the plug even fell out. So they started to really look at it and they found that little dust plug. So even if the plug hadn't fallen out, they would have still had to abort. They might have had to abort a little bit later, which would have meant an injection. So they were actually luckier than they thought. Now, Tom Stafford in Gemini 9 went through a couple of these on-the-pad scrubs with Gene Cernan. And everybody said Stafford was a jinx. He said he came to the conclusion that no, it was Schirra and Cernan that were the jinx, and he was totally innocent. So eventually, on December 15th, 1965, they did the first rendezvous. The Russians had said they had done a rendezvous earlier because they launched one of their Voskhds, and then they launched another one and just missed the other one. And that was the rendezvous, Russian style. So I shouldn't say Russian, I should say Soviet style. We'll change it to Russian style after they capture all the rest of the countries over there in Europe that they're currently invading. GT-8, okay, was up about 7 hours before they had to abort because they had a thruster, which was, by the way, the valve on the number 8 thruster. The number 8 thruster on GT-8 stuck in the open position, actually shorted out. And they found out the entire system was wired that way so that if anything shorted out, these thrusters would stick in the open position. And the spacecraft that was coming up next, spacecraft 9, was so far along, they couldn't change it. So they went in with all these sleeves because they found all these areas where this thing could short out. And they put all these sleeves in there to keep it from shorting out. I heard something like 32 of those were put in. But I've also heard countless. So when people say countless, that means they didn't do the research to actually count the damn things. Now this one really ticked me off as a kid, okay? Because this whole thing happened over in the Pacific, there was nothing to see, and what happened? The networks interrupted television that evening. Batman was preempted. And it was the second half of a two-parter. You know, they were on Tuesday, and then you had the cliffhanger, and then there was the part that... And I'm sitting there as a third grader, and I'm going, what? I think we can't even see now. And there's Chet Huntley and David Brinkley. David Brinkley, who cared about spaceflight. Actually, well, he probably didn't know the difference between hypergolic and hypersonic, but that's beside the point. He thought that it was crap, and it was boring, and it was dumb, just like him. The next flight was Gemini 9 with Tom Stafford and Gene Cernan, where Cernan was supposed to do all kinds of stuff on his EVA, and it turned in what he called the spacewalk from hell. On TV, we saw it like this, okay, with this bozo hanging from wires outside of this Gemini mock-up in a studio. And while Cernan's out there struggling, okay, with his umbilical, and then he had to crawl back and with almost no light and try to put on the pack, and he just had a really good time. The guys in the simulation didn't have a very good time either, because when it started, he opened the door and the door almost fell off. It's really funny when you watch it. It's like, if you go on YouTube and you type in Gemini 9 oops, this video will come up. And you can see the guy, and they're talking about, okay, Cernan's now opening the door, and he's standing up, and this guy opens the door in slow motion, you know, and he stands up, and he loses the door, and it goes, wham, like that. Ooh, good effects. It was the 60s. We met these guys in 1966, okay? Major Matt Mason. If you want to know anything about him, ask Jim Banke. G.I. Joe. My parents were poor, and so I actually did get the capsule. I didn't get the G.I. Joe. I got a knockoff called Yank that I think was, you know, maybe type A or something. But he was the same size, you know, so the clothes all fit. I didn't care. That's the only difference was, you know, mine had nicer hair than G.I. Joe. And he didn't have the thing on my finger either. So, but anyway, that's 1966, about the time of Gemini 9 is when we first saw that. And here's Gemini 11, okay? Now the reason why I'm showing you this particular picture, which is totally not iconic, is tomorrow on the tour, you're going to go to the museum where they have this white room. And if you're lucky, you'll be able to see where these guys were standing in that very same white room. Now, earlier, this past few years, they refurbed the white room and they set it out there beside the museum. And I went to visit, and Jim Banke released us from what we were doing for the Explorer 1 anniversary. And he said, yeah, go out there, look at anything. But he said, don't you go spelunking in that white room. He said, you know, don't be like, you know, everybody here knows Pete Merlin. Don't go Pete Merlin spelunking in that white room. So I didn't promise, but, you know, Jim Banke, okay? So he knows me, and so that white room looks like this inside. I'm not saying I was in there.
You found this picture.
Yeah, they were on my camera.
You will see that on the museum tour,
Can they go inside?
if nobody stops.
Okay, now there was a sign up then that said, do not enter, okay? Now, to some of us, that sign, do not enter, says really cool stuff beyond this point.
I was there in September and I could have gone in. There was nobody else to stop.
Yeah, nobody stopped me either. But on the other hand, when you're walking up those steps, okay, and you're looking at them and you go, well, there's nice paint, but man, this is pretty rickety. And I'm thinking, what if this whole staircase comes tumbling down, you know, and I come walking under that door like, would not have been good. This has got to be Spaceflight's most fun duo. These guys, if you'll notice, have U.S. Navy pilot's wings on instead of NASA wings on their spacesuits. And I really didn't notice that until I blew this picture up and really looked at it. Pete Conrad's son, Andy, one of his sons, and I went to school at Embry-Riddle together in Daytona. So, yeah, he was a very cool guy. He went out to Prescott, to the campus out there after a year, but he hated his roommate, so he spent most of his time in our room. When he first got on campus, a friend of mine who came to me and he says, you're our resident space buff. He says, there's this guy in the dining room claims he's Pete Conrad's son. He says, he's my roommate. Will you come and is there a question you can ask him or something you can say, that'll verify that? I said, yeah. So we went down and we sat down and we were talking and I said, you're Pete Conrad's son? He goes, yeah. I said, he's the one that burned the camera out on Gemini or on Apollo 12, isn't he? He says, no, that was Mr. Peen. That was not my dad. I said, yeah, that's the guy.
Was that episode on From Earth to Moon, was that fairly accurate? The one about
a lot of those were they're much more accurate than that comedy, The Right Stuff.
Because they look like they're having way too much fun.
And if you listen to the transcripts, they really were. And anywhere that Pete Conrad went, there was fun. Andy has told stories to me that it would blow your mind. But anyway, he and Wally Schirach invented this thing called a funnelator. And it was these big surgical tubes with a big funnel, okay? And they tied it between two trees really far apart. And they stretched this, they got them at the clinic there at the JSC. And you pulled this back, so it took two guys. And then somebody put a water balloon in, and you launch it. And it would shoot it about a block away. And so they were having beers one day at a picnic, and they started launching those things at various areas in the neighborhood, not knowing where they were coming down, and laughing their buns off as each one just went out of sight. So that's what Pete Conrad was like. Here's Buzz Aldrin trying really hard to explain rendezvous to anyone. None of them would understand it, but. That essentially, Gemini 12 ended the Gemini program, and we went on to Apollo thereafter. They did leave a pretty cool sign behind, though. Most of the pads there are gone. You cannot go out on them because they claim they're still toxified from the hypergals that the spacecraft or the booster used. I'd put on yellow boots and go out there if they'd let me, but they won't. Next was Apollo. This is one of my favorite drawings. I found it in a book and swiped it. Anybody know what vehicle that is? That's a
Saturn 1.
Saturn 1, Block 2. There we go. And it's either SA 8, 9, or 10, right? Apollo 1, I really don't have to say a lot about that. Everybody in this room knows what happened on Apollo 1. And it's a shame, but if you read a lot of it, and as a historian, that's my other job. If you really put the accounts in perspective, Apollo 1 had to happen because they were going way too fast. They had the Apollo applications program was going in a direction where they were going to need something like 15 Saturn 1Bs and another 5 Saturn 5s to put these stations in orbit, to put permanent lunar bases on orbit. They had things where they were going to convert a LEM into a three-man space station, and they had a lot of stuff going on that was supposed to happen. As a matter of fact, the first booster for that was the one that launched Skylab 1, and that was over on pad 37, waiting to go when this happened. And they disassembled that after the fire, and they used the booster from Apollo 1 to fly Apollo 5. This is what it looks like today. This photo is mine. I took it, and it very much speaks for itself. Unfortunately, a lot of us think of 34 as a sad place. But 34 was the place where Saturn rocketry was born. So it's not really a sad place. A lot of steps forward took place there, including Apollo 7. Speaking of Apollo 7, there's the guys. Walt Cunningham, one of my favorite people in the whole wide world. He signed one of my Saturn 1B models. I was at a NARCON that was in Virginia, and he was there with his wife. He had his audio book. He was signing them. And I said, he's signing? He's got a pen out? Oh, and I took one of my display Saturn 1Bs, and I walked over and I said, would you sign this for me? And he took it from me, and he looked at it, and he went, this is a great rocket. He said, no, not the model, the one I wrote on. And he showed it to his wife and said, this Saturn 1B was a fabulous rocket to ride on. And then he signed it, and now it's in my private collection. I put it back on my table. You wouldn't believe the offers I got for that. Up to $270. He started at $225, and I kept bargaining him up, and I said, no, forget it. I just want to jerk the chain, see how high you go. don't mess with me at a table out here, okay? Do not. Apollo 8, when that flight took place, it was Christmas in Michigan. I was just really, as a kid, starting to kind of get into this. You know, I was in the 5th grade, and my parents, on the night that the vehicle was orbiting the moon and they had their famous broadcast, were having a Christmas party. So there was all these drunken neighbors and stuff out in our living room. And I locked myself in my mom and dad's bedroom, turned on the little black and white TV and sat there and watched it. It's like, all right, you know. So everybody was drunk and I was on the moon. Apollo 9 came next, and I would say this was the mission that really put the hook in me. There was something about seeing that guy, Rusty Schweiger, standing on that limb in space that just really got to me. I like the red helmets too. But anyway, there was something about that just really put the hook in me as a kid, so I started to take a lot more interest.
Is it true that his helmet was red because he had red hair and he wanted his...
No, it's not true. As a matter of fact, the earlier helmets, they had them in their red and they were white, and I had yet to find out why they went to red in the first place, because red is heat absorbent and you really don't want it on your helmet in space. But I don't know why.
Blue,
I don't know. This is cool. This is Apollo 10, and I was hooked by Apollo 10. Again, there was something about that LEM just scooting along, barely, 50,000 feet over the lunar surface. That really, as a kid, got to me. You know, I sat there in the living room with my little AMT lamp. Am I high enough above the carpet? And of course, after Apollo 10 came the one that got all Americans going, and that was Apollo 11. Once again, a non-iconic photo, but I have this one intentionally because take a look, take a look right here. That shovel, okay? In the 7th grade, I was in junior high school, and in my sheet metal class, I made that shovel base. We could make anything we wanted for our semester project. I soldered it, bent all the metal. I made that shovel base. Okay, so I took it to my teacher to get graded. He said, "What is this?" I said, "It's a shovel." He said, "That doesn't look like a shovel." I said, "No, it's a shovel for on the moon, like the Apollo astronauts use. You know, it's a lunar shovel." And he looked at me and he went, "You're not on the moon." C. Which, considering, okay, that was an industrial arts class, a C for me, good. Because we have a saying around our house, okay? If you want to see somebody get hurt, give Wes a tool. If you want to see Wes get hurt, give Wes a power tool. For Apollo 11, the day of the landing, we went to a friend's house out in the country, actually a relative's house out in the country for a picnic. My brother's birthday is around that time, and so is my cousin's, so they were combining the birthday party that day. So out we went, and on the way there, my dad stopped at a golf station, and he bought one of these accursed things for me. Expected me to put it together, okay? Now, I had just repeated the 3rd grade and was now in the 6th grade at that time, okay? And hoping to get out of there alive. And he wanted me to put that together. So, as I watched Cronkite and Sherrod during the landing, I sat and struggled with that mofo. I even got some of my relatives who were college educated to try and work on that. And they worked on it for a little while and went, "No, kid, this is yours." Okay, for years, that thing sat half-built, a quarter-built, in my closet with all these rocket parts. That's what the landing looked like on TV. Just my luck, we finally got a color TV, and the landing was in black and white. Anyway, for those of you who were around then, you remember exactly what you were doing at that time, I would reckon. I had a little 50-power telescope, and my dad went out and we had a pool that was, one of these 4-foot-high pools, and Dad had built this little deck that you could jump off of. And we set it up on that deck and we pointed it at the moon. So we could all go out and take turns looking at the moon, like we would see something. Yes, hand up.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, all questions must be submitted in writing.
in the Orlando Sentinel, I don't know if it went national, but there was a cartoon that came out during Apollo 11 of the flag being planted on the moon and the guys from Apollo 1 being there helping push it up.
Oh, that's pretty
It
cool.
was-
Speaking of the
yeah.
flag on the moon, okay, from Apollo 11, and we'll do questions after we're done. Speaking of the flag on the moon, the last thing they saw as they took off was the flag fall over. Because the regolith was only about that thick and it was bedrock underneath. And so what happened was they tried to plant the flag and it wouldn't go. And if you sit down and watch this video, they really struggled with this flag, and they were both thinking the exact same thing. Because astronauts are a lot like airline pilots, okay? You know, every word you say is being recorded.
Yes.
They tell you in the cockpit, that cockpit voice recorder, everything you say. So remember, don't say anything you don't want them to broadcast on CNN when you're dead. So anyway, this is airline pilot humor. You should have laughed with pilots. But anyway, they were both thinking the same thing. Oh my Lord, here's the largest audience ever to watch anything on television around the planet, and we're going to plant our flag and it's going to go poof, like that. And they were lucky. It stayed up. They stayed away from it. If you watch the video, they stayed well away from it. So a few days after, or a few weeks after Apollo 11, my dad once again spent a few of the dollars that we didn't have at a Gulf station and bought me We Came in Peace. I opened that book up, and it was like a Bible. It's all there, and it was so well illustrated. There were so many facts, and I had my nose in that book throughout my 1 year in the 6th grade, to the point where my teacher, Miss Rozier, told me, "Don't ever bring that to class again." Now, my presentation, this is kind of a sample of what the 6 books are going to be like. What you're hearing from me, Pat says, I drove Pat nuts. He's one of my editors. Pat and Jim are my editors for these 6 books. And I drove Pat nuts because he said, "You write the way you talk." And I said, "Yeah, I got 15 books out. I write the way I talk. It sells." Okay. He says, "But you know, it doesn't keep up with the AP style guide." I said, "Well, I'll just put that in the front then. You know, if you like the AP style guide, throw it away because you're not going to use it in this book." Ta-da! And so anyhow, let's see if I can go here. There we go. What you heard here is a sample of that. Now, I had to cut this a little short because I had a lot of other stuff in here. Wednesday night, I'm working on this program, and my wife came up and looked at it, and she went, "You have 84 slides on there." I said, "Yeah." She says, "How long is your talk?" I said, "An hour." She said, "You can't talk for 2 seconds on a slide, and it takes you 20 minutes per slide." Get a lot of those out of there. So this is actually cut way down from what it was. I had some really good Apollo stuff in there, okay? And I had some really good Skylab stuff coming, and I had shuttle stuff that was really good. So anyway, when the book comes out, pick it up and or buy it and put it on your Kindle. The only thing with Kindle is it won't have any drawings or graphics, but everything that I talk about is there. We were all there together. We all grew up with it together. Some of us were leaders in there. Some of us are leaders now. And I got to point around because there's other guys in here. So we were all together in this. And last night, after the reception, which I read wrong, I thought there was dinner. Anyway, last night while we were on our way to Burger King, I was out in the parking lot. And I was standing there, and you could see the VAB in the distance, and that breeze was blowing, and it reminded me a lot of the night that STS-1 launched. And Brian Nicholas, who's at my table, and I camped out on the riverbank for the scrub, and then we came back 2 days later and camped out for the launch. And those nights we stood there and we looked at that vehicle out there in the floods, and you couldn't take your eyes off of it. And the entire community was crowded with tourists. There were millions up and down the beach, and you looked at that and you said to yourself, "We're back." Or if this thing goes, we're going to have a space program again, and it'll be from now on. I always thought it would be from now on, and it turned out that was not the case. And I was talking this morning to somebody. He said, "Where do you think our human spaceflight program is going?" And I said, "Look at where the political winds are going. Spaceflight has always been a football of the political class. Wherever the political winds are going is where spaceflight's going to go." Okay? A lot of us were shocked and surprised when somebody waved his magic hand and wiped out Constellation. Constellation that had just been approved through the Congress by a vote of 400 to 8. Okay? Gone. Why? Because I said so. It's gone. Okay? Florida, oh, who cares if anybody works there again? See ya. And fortunately, the Congress stepped in and came up with something else that we can work toward. But I was looking at that VAB and I thought, that night, I never imagined that we would be at this point in our human spaceflight program. And what is there that we can do about it? At this moment, nothing. You can't do anything about it. All you can do is watch the political winds and see how they shift. Hopefully they will shift again. Always in history, I'm a historian, it always happens. The pendulum goes one way and it goes too far. And then it comes back the other way and it goes too far. And if we're happy, we meet it right in the middle sometimes. So hopefully we'll be in the middle sometime coming up. And hopefully you'll buy a lot of my books and I'll have enough money to get my dog out of the pound.
To write some more.
Write some more. Write some more. Yeah, by the way, I'm not 6 books. I'm writing 7 books right now. Okay? I will have 7 titles that come out this year. I'm writing all 6 books concurrently. So if I get bored with Gemini, I just go to Apollo for a while. I get bored with Apollo and then go to Mercury. I get bored with Spaceflight, I go write another Great Lakes book. And after I get out of the 1800s, I go back. So we have 2 that are done right now. If Jim Banke gets going, we will have the shuttle one done, and hopefully we'll have releases in the second half of this year. So if we don't, blame Banke. Anyhow, that's my show, and I hope nobody was bored. Good, good. That's Mr. Estes. No applause, just throw money. Okay, questions? Any questions? Come on! Yes?
We had so many toys back in the 60s during the height of the space race, and there's nothing now hardly, you know, the culture doesn't have reflections and things in the toys and the whatever you got. I think you just commented on that, really.
Yes, that's very close to being exactly right. Another thing you don't see is you don't see a lot of space models. During Apollo and Gemini, when a vehicle was flying, we had models of it. Okay, Monogram was there, Revell was there. I just bought, believe it or not, you remember the MPC Titan 3C that had a paper tube you could shove up in if you wanted to fly it, but other than that it was a plastic model? I just bought one of those off eBay for $30. Somebody has gotten hold of the MPC molds. And the only difference is it's not a flyable model anymore. Even though the molds still have some of the plastic flyable pieces in it, there's nothing there to actually make it fly. But if you want to make a plastic one, it's there. The same company are the one who came out with the manned spaceflight version with the Saturn V and 1B and right down to the Mercury Redstone. They're using a different color plastic, but who cares? So some of that is progressing, but as far as the matte mason and that kind of stuff, no, we don't have it. And why? Well, because kids' toys are different now. Okay, kids are doing this for toys. Except mine. Mine do this. So, but you have things like Minecraft and things such as that. Another thing that's happening that is positive is you're seeing a lot more young ladies getting into rocketry. And a lot of kids are coming to these rocket launches, young kids that are the age we were when he indoctrinated us. And so anyway, a lot of kids are starting to come into this. And the reason why is because in the 70s and early 80s, if you were a space buff, if you were a rocket geek, you had to be a closet rocket geek, okay? I had to keep all my stuff in my room and launch it when nobody was looking, okay? And then on the outside, I was a hockey player, okay? Nobody messed with me. But anyway, I had a girlfriend that came down to my room and she looked around and she went, I didn't know you do this. What? What do you know about that? You're smart? I'm out of here. So anyway, I said, no, really, I'll go to the ice rink. I'll be stupid again. Please, come back. So, yeah.
I just want to put a plug in for STEM.
Oh, that's where I'm going. Can you hold for 1 second? Those of us who were in that mode have grown up now, and we are the teachers, the educators of these kids that are coming up. In my daughter's elementary school, there are 3 teachers right now that are huge space buffs that were so in the 80s and were so in the 70s. And that's what's happening is, when I was in junior high school, when you were in junior high school, if you went to your science teacher and started talking about Skylab, they kind of looked at you like, will you please take your seat again? Now, it's the teachers that are bringing that in, okay? And I talked to my daughter's teacher, and I was saying something, I'm going down to KFC for this, and she said, oh, I did this and I did that, and she said, in my other school, we had a space club. Guess what? Middle of this month, we're starting a space club at my daughter's school for 3rd and 4th grade, heavy in STEM. And that's what you're seeing now is it's actually coming through the schools. Instead of being on the outside and trying to get into the schools, you've already planted the seeds. Those seeds that you planted are now sprouting in these schools. And that's where these STEM programs are growing in popularity. Unless, of course, you're Senator Rohrabacher, who went into a NASA discussion and hearing on STEM and started saying, he came in late, he says, well, I'm, for one, am all in favor of STEM research, and I think this and that. And it was one of the other senators who went, excuse me, Senator, we're talking about NASA, STEM, science, technology, and math. You know, that's what we're talking about? Well, I'm for that too. So that's what we're up against, folks. But anyway, at the grassroots level, the STEM programs are very popular. When we went to the principal about this space thing, this space group, class, club, whatever you want to call it, you just said the word STEM. Okay, you got it. I said, we'll put some math in there too. So
It's coming from the top down as well. My brother actually is a retired general in the Air Force. He's also the president of the Civil Engineering alumni of the Air Force. And they're spending a lot of money, and a lot of people, a lot of engineers are bringing it down to the high school and middle school level. So not only going up through, my son's in elementary school and we're starting it there, but they're also, for the folks that have gone through elementary school and part of middle school that had not got that, some professional societies are coming back down because really they're looking at their potential employees.
That's correct.
And they need to start getting.
I've been asked a lot of times, what can I do to spread this around to kids? And my answer is always the same. Tell the kids to meet you at a soccer field. Take yourself a box of B64s and get an Alpha or whatever you can get your hands on and shoot it. One of the answers I got from a guy was, what's a B64? Okay, we'll start at a little lower level for you. Yes, sir.
I mean, there are programs. I teach at Freedom High School in Orlando. I teach astronomy, and I also teach a class called Principles of Engineering. And it's part of what's called Project Lead the Way. And
see, he's one of the seeds right there, okay?
Project Lead the Way is a program that's, right now it's in middle school to high school. They're going into elementary school. It gets to the point where the program is set up so that a child in kindergarten will have an engineering class every year all the way till they graduate from high school. Yeah. And so they do that in our school, and not next year, but the year after that, I will be teaching Principles of Engineering and Aerospace Engineering, of which Ryan's is a big deal.
I'm at Meriden High School here,
Okay.
and we have you've seen maybe our students today. I'm the director of our academy, Banke Academy of Aerospace Technology, and we're Project Lead the Way school as well.
Yay!
So there's introduction to engineering, there's principles of engineering, there's aerospace engineering, and then senior year, digital electronics, and then senior year they take a course called ED&D, Engineering Design Development, where they have a capstone project, where they said it's done for 4 years. And we're actually got 2 middle schools that we're trying to get the curriculum in as well, to be feeder schools to us. So.
Great. Now, for those of you who aren't teachers, you actually are teachers, because you know about this stuff. You know how to launch a rocket, even if it's something as simple as an Alpha. And believe me, little kids see that, and it starts to turn the buttons.
Are any of you guys local?
Orlando.
I mean, in Brevard? Nope. Okay. Because we haven't been connected with any model rocketry per se, except a little bit in the classroom.
We are now.
Yeah, I know.
Welcome.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's where it all starts. For me, as far as model rocketry goes, the kid up the block had a rocket that he had built. And I don't know what kind it was, but he built it, and he went out and he stuck, this is right after Apollo 11, and he stuck it in his yard, he stuck the rod in his yard and had a fuse, lit the fuse, and then I was in the group of kids, and off it went. And it came down in the corn across the railroad tracks from our house. They all went out there looking for it, and I was kind of like, well, I'm not going to the corn today. So I watched, and eventually kids came out one by one, and this kid, Dennis, came out, and he didn't have his rocket. So I saw nobody was there, and I said, I'll go look. I walked right to it, right? So I knew where it was, said, I can take this home, and I went, no, I'll go ask my dad. So I went, asked my dad. I said, you know, that rocket, I went, if I were to find it, can I keep it? No, he said, you have to give it back to the guy it belongs to. I said, okay. So I went and got the rocket, I took it back, knocked on Dennis's door, and he was like, gee, thanks. And he left. Well, okay, no, but I did the right thing. At the end of that week, my dad brought home an MPC Flare Patriot. That was my first model rocket. And he had some B64s that he got at the hobby store. And he had some red fuse. And the only problem was the guy at the hobby store told him you got to have some wire to shoot this off on. So Dad took a coat hanger and straightened it out. It was about this long. And stuck it in the yard, in our backyard. So we get this thing set up according to the instructions, you know, with this toilet paper in it. We didn't have toilet paper in it. And parachute down in there. And he sticks the fuse in, and he lights the match, and we get back and wait. And it takes off. He gets as high as the garage, turns ballistic, and goes right down the road. So we all ran through the garage, and there's my neighbor up the road, about 400 feet up the road, Mr. Ostentowski and his big, fat Polish guy in his wife beater t-shirt with his hand-pushed lawnmower, and he's standing there with his eyes real big, and this thing is buried right next to him and smoldering all over the place. That was my very first rocket. But it came about because one guy took a rocket and launched it out of his yard. Okay, and that set me on this path. I already had an interest in this stuff, and it set me along that path. There's a me out there all over the place. So I will conclude by saying that that's what you as grassroots can do. Take a handful of B64s and take a rocket, go out to an open field somewhere and tell the kids, come on, you want to see one? Or shoot one and wait for them to come to you. So yeah, you can shoot one. I recently did a launch for a group of brownies, you know, little sub-Girl Scouts. And it was my daughter's troop pack, whatever they call them, dozen. Anyway, we took all the rockets that I had and all the engines, which were assorted. You know, there's A's, B's, and C's in this box. And we just started launching, okay? And so I had a line of parents who taught how to get everything ready and prep everything. Then we put it on the pad, and I give the girls a thing, you know, pull the key out, go, boom, I'll put the key in, go. And while we're going through this process, girls are in line, and I hear one little girl say to the other one, when you push the button, push it really hard, because the harder you push it, the higher it goes. So there you go. That's how I get started. Yes, sir.
Off back on you, another subject, and that's Apollo 11, and they landed, and of course they had their TV camera. Did you ever find out why that camera was upside down on the lander when they came down?
Oh yeah, actually there is a book at Apogee Books, and it's called Live from the Moon, and it's all details about those TV cameras.
It's actually DVD.
There's a DVD in
But they have a DVD as well, which
Oh,
is
really?
excellent, called Live from the Moon.
Okay.
No.
I like the book. I like to read. I like to be able to go through and say, okay, this is an exact quote, because you know you can't get that out of a DVD. But anyway, I would highly recommend that because it tells details of all the camera lineage. Gordon Cooper had the first TV camera in orbit. It was slow scan. It only took a few frames, but that was it. So now they're going to throw me out of here, guys. So anyway, come to my table, buy my rockets.